World War II was a war of thunder, the deafening roar of bombers, the brutal crash of artillery, and the relentless grinding of tank treads. But in the shadow of that magnificent chaos, a different, more chilling kind of war was being waged, a silent war. Imagine a transport, as fragile as a bird's wing, carrying a fully loaded jeep, a powerful howitzer, and a full squad of elite fighting men, soaring over enemy lines, delivering its deadly cargo with nothing more than the whisper of wind against canvas and wood. This machine was the ghost of Allied airborne warfare, designed for a lethal, one-way trip, and its silence was its deadliest feature. This is the astonishing, often forgotten story of the Waco CG-4A, the unsung World War II glider that revolutionized airborne logistics. It was a deceptively simple, incredibly inexpensive, yet utterly critical weapon that carried the key to Allied victory in the most desperate and crucial operations, from the disastrous initial landings in Sicily to the monumental, climactic push across the Rhine. It was the master of clandestine delivery, providing a decisive edge by landing heavy support exactly where it was needed most. We will delve into the desperate logistical need for silent transport, the ingenious low-cost engineering that allowed the mass production of these flying coffins, and the incredibly high-stakes missions that relied entirely on the almost suicidal bravery of the men who piloted them. It's a compelling tale of low-tech brilliance conquering high-tech defense and forever changing the face of warfare. If you are fascinated by the forgotten engineering marvels and the hidden heroes of World War II, please consider subscribing. Your support is crucial and helps us to continue uncovering 39 more chapters of untold, incredible stories like this one. Paratroopers were, in many ways, the shock troops of the era, revolutionary forces that could descend from the sky and seize key objectives behind enemy lines. However, they were crippled by a fundamental logistical limitation. A paratrooper could only jump with light infantry weapons, a limited supply of ammunition, and what little gear he could strap to his chest. This left airborne units incredibly vulnerable to enemy armor and counterattack. The Allied command desperately needed a way to deliver heavy support, artillery, anti-tank guns, communications vehicles, and tons of bulk supplies, directly onto the objective, silently and immediately after the initial drop. Parachuting such heavy, complex equipment was notoriously unreliable. The gear would often be scattered across miles of terrain, or worse, damaged beyond use upon impact. The solution was a controlled, precise descent that retained the element of surprise, but without the telltale roar of a petrol engine. The glider's formal designation was the CG-4A, standing simply for Cargo Glider, Model 4, Version A. Its humble military name gave no hint of the dramatic, often terrifying role it played on the battlefield. It quickly earned grim but affectionate nicknames among the troops, primarily the Flying Coffin or the Coffin on wings. These names were brutally honest. The aircraft was a large, unarmored target constructed primarily of fabric stretched over a steel frame, offering virtually zero protection against ground fire during its final, silent plunge toward the enemy. Despite the fear, the name also reflected a dark respect for the aircraft's incredible capacity to deliver life-saving firepower through hostile skies. The true genius of the CG-4A was not its aerodynamics, but its sheer simplicity and cost-effectiveness. The design, spearheaded by the Waco Aircraft Company, was brilliantly engineered for massive, decentralized production. The U.S. government understood the attrition rate would be staggering, so they didn't rely on specialized aircraft builders. Instead, they contracted over a dozen of the most unlikely manufacturers, companies that specialized in everything from making pianos to manufacturing fine furniture and even refrigerators. This unprecedented move allowed factories across America to contribute to the war effort, assembling the same basic wooden and fabric components, achieving a rapid mass production that was absolutely critical for sustaining the colossal airborne campaigns. The physical construction of the CG-4A reflected a brutal economy of materials. Unlike heavy bombers or fighter aircraft, The glider's core framework was a lattice of chromolybdenum steel tubing, a material chosen for its high strength-to-weight ratio. This frame was then covered with humble cotton fabric, meticulously treated and tautened with a special hardening liquid known as DOPE for aerodynamic stability. This unique combination kept the glider's empty weight astonishingly low, just under 4,000 pounds, allowing it to carry its massive payload, but it also meant that a single burst of machine gun fire could turn the fuselage into a mass of fluttering canvas and splintered wood. Its lightness was its logistical virtue, but its vulnerability was the constant terror of its crew. The glider carried absolutely no protective armor. This was not a budgetary oversight. It was a non-negotiable requirement for the entire design concept. Every pound of added weight would directly translate into a pound less payload, critically limiting the necessary artillery and vehicles it could deliver. Therefore, the pilot's only defenses were the profound silence of their approach and the sheer, terrifying speed of their landing descent. The noise of a powered aircraft would often alert the enemy miles away, but the glider was the very definition of a clandestine weapon. Paradoxically, the lack of heavy armor was its strategic strength. It made a successful, surprise delivery possible where a heavier, noisy plane would have been shot down long before it reached the drop zone. The CG-4A's most impressive and defining feature was its vast cargo capacity relative to its flimsy structure. This was the glider's core mission, solving the heavy equipment gap. The massive, hinged nose section, a design feature that looked more suited to a cargo ship than an aircraft, would swing open like a massive jaw. This allowed the glider to swallow bulky cargo whole, transforming airborne logistics overnight. Inside its cavernous belly, a CG-4A could carry either a 75mm pack howitzer, a fully loaded jeep, a vital mobility asset, or, sometimes, a quarter-ton truck. This capability immediately established the vital connection between the lightly armed, scattered paratroopers and the heavy, necessary anti-tank and artillery firepower they needed to survive the inevitable German armored counterattack. It was a logistical miracle delivered by wood and canvas. Each glider was flown by two highly trained men, usually warrant officers or corporals, known simply as glider pilots. These men occupied a unique, terrifying niche in the military hierarchy. They were fundamentally non-combat transport personnel on the journey to the fight, yet upon landing, they were instantly expected to become frontline riflemen, fighting alongside the infantry they had just delivered. Their mission was singular and unforgiving: deliver the cargo precisely and safely, then survive. They flew a machine with no engine, no second chances, and often only a single, heavily reinforced seat, making their high-risk service a blend of engineering proficiency and sheer, unflinching courage. Their attrition rate during major operations was devastatingly high. The true workhorse enabling the glider's silent approach was the powered tow plane, most commonly the ubiquitous C-47 Skytran. Towing the CG-4A was a grueling test of the C-47's capabilities. The sheer weight of the glider and its cargo, coupled with the massive aerodynamic drag caused by the glider's square design, meant the tow plane was operating at its absolute performance limit. This complex, high-stress towing process, often conducted in the dead of night and requiring complex maneuvers to avoid enemy radar and atmospheric turbulence, demanded intense focus from the powered crew. It was a symbiotic relationship. The C-47 provided the lift, and the glider provided the surprise. The most critical moment of the entire airborne operation belonged to the glider pilot. He controlled the final, critical release. A simple lever that, upon activation, instantly severed the massive nylon tow rope connecting the glider to the C-47. This act, often taking place miles from the intended landing zone and sometimes under heavy fire, represented absolute commitment. The pilot instantly went from being towed to controlling a heavy, unpowered descent. Once released, the glider transformed into a high-speed, controlled projectile. There was no going back, no chance to abort the landing, and only one desperate shot to hit the target zone and bring the fragile cargo and crew down alive. Glider pilots faced the impossible task of bringing a massive, fully loaded transport down onto rough, unpaved ground, often with obstacles like trees, ditches, or hedgerows. The glider's landing gear was simple, sometimes comprising little more than skids for absorbing maximum impact. The landing was, by design, a planned crash. The pilot had to utilize the ground itself to scrub off the terrifying speed of the descent, sometimes deliberately steering the nose into dense foliage or through carefully chosen obstacles. The forces involved in the final impact were bone-jarring, and the survival of the crew and, more importantly, the integrity of the critical cargo depended entirely on the pilot's nerve and skill in those final, furious seconds. The glider pilot regiment was a unique and often undervalued formation. They were drawn from a highly eclectic mix: experienced former civilian pilots volunteering for duty, eager young men transferring from the infantry, and personnel moved over from other service branches. Crucially, they were not fighter aces, but faced a distinct psychological burden. They were the elite transport force that could not turn back. They knew their flight to the landing zone was only the first half of the mission. The second half, to survive and fight on the ground, was equally, if not more, perilous. This dual role demanded not just flight proficiency but immense mental fortitude, given the appallingly high attrition rate they faced in major operations. Glider pilot training was ruthlessly focused not on taking off, but on achieving the perfect crash landing. The curriculum involved endless practice of dead-stick landings and precision touchdowns, where pilots learned to manipulate the heavy, inertial aircraft without any engine power. The most terrifying tactic they mastered was energy absorption, deliberately aiming the glider to slice through thick hedgerows, crush through small groves of trees, or plow across uneven farmland to quickly dissipate speed and prevent catastrophic overruns or crashes into hardened obstacles. Every training flight was a high-stakes lesson in managing a forced, violent collision with the Earth. The most critical and perilous missions were executed under the profound cover of darkness to maximize the element of surprise. In this absolute void, navigation was extraordinarily challenging. Pilots relied heavily on rudimentary instruments and fleeting, ephemeral ground signals, colored lights or flares laid out by advanced Pathfinder teams. The final approach was often a near-blind plunge into the blackness. This was the ultimate desperate gamble, where success depended entirely on the trust that the landing zone was at least minimally secured, backed by the pilot's unshakable nerve and ability to react instantly to unexpected terrain or obstacles. Unlike parachuting, which often scattered forces across a wide area, the glider embodied the doctrine of on-demand delivery. It allowed troops and their crucial heavy equipment to be deposited directly onto the key objective, ready for immediate, concentrated action. This capability enabled lightning-fast, coordinated assaults on critical targets like bridges, fortified headquarters, or vital communication hub. The glider's doctrine was rooted in maximizing shock and minimizing enemy reaction time, allowing Allied forces to seize and immediately reinforce strategic positions that would have been impossible for light infantry alone to hold. The glider's key tactical advantage was its invisibility, the profound lack of noise. In the silent European night, the roar of engines was an instant alert, but the glider descended nearly noiselessly. German observers often failed to detect the danger until the massive, dark shapes were almost directly overhead. By the time the enemy reacted and opened fire, the gliders had already slammed onto the ground, disgorging elite troops and heavy weapons into the heart of the German defense. The silence was not a passive characteristic, but an active, psychological weapon that guaranteed the element of surprise and dramatically increased the chances of successful insertion. Early in the war, the Allies, driven by logistical zeal, tested a truly audacious concept: the Snatch system. The idea was to use a low-flying powered aircraft, such as a C-47, to hook onto the landed glider and tow it off the ground, recovering both the machine and its crew. This would transform the glider from a one-use projectile into a reusable asset. While successfully demonstrated in tests, involving a complex system of ropes and airborne hooks, the extreme complexity, the necessity of perfect weather conditions, and the overwhelming danger of the battlefield environment made the Snatch system utterly impractical for full-scale operations. It remained a daring logistical footnote, emphasizing the high-risk, one-way nature of the mission. The glider operation was never intended to be an isolated action. It was the crucial, heavy-lifting counterweight to the paratrooper drop. The relationship was symbiotic. Paratroopers were the first wave, the highly mobile vanguard securing the perimeter and neutralizing immediate threats. Gliders, arriving moments later, delivered the indispensable tools necessary to hold that perimeter. Radio gear, jeeps for mobility, and, most importantly, the anti-tank capability that was essential to repel the inevitable armored counterattack. The success of the entire airborne mission hinged on this delicate, sequential delivery. The internal logistics of the CG-4A were as critical as its flight. Vehicles like the Jeep or the 75mm Howitzer were not simply rolled into the fuselage. They were meticulously secured with specialized heavy-duty webbing, chocks, and custom-designed cradles. This was a non-negotiable step. Any shifting cargo during the violent, high-G, unpowered landing descent could fatally crush the glider crew, severely damage the equipment, or tear apart the glider's fragile structure, turning the crucial delivery into a total loss. The discipline of the loading crews was directly linked to the survival of the combat troop. The selection of the landing zone, LZ, was arguably the single most critical decision in any airborne operation. Planners had to balance conflicting demands. The LZ had to be large enough to accommodate dozens of massive gliders landing in quick succession, yet small enough to avoid scattering the forces and leaving them vulnerable. Experts scoured intelligence for fields that could be rapidly cleared of obstacles, ensuring the maximum number of gliders landed intact and close to the fighting. A bad LZ meant immediate, unnecessary casualties and a crippling delay in getting the heavy weapons into action. While the CG-4A was fundamentally designed for offensive logistics, its large internal volume allowed it to serve a secondary, crucial humanitarian role in rare instances. By carefully rigging the fuselage, wounded soldiers could be secured and extracted. This provided a desperate, high-risk means of casualty evacuation, casevac. If a secure, clear stretch of ground was established, a rescue tow plane could retrieve the modified glider, offering a vital lifeline to the most critically wounded soldiers who could not wait for traditional ground transport. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943, codenamed Operation Husky, provided the first major baptism by fire for the Allied glider forces. It was meant to be the grand unveiling of the silent delivery concept, but it quickly devolved into a logistical nightmare and a brutal learning experience. Strong winds, pilot inexperience, and navigational errors combined to create chaos. Many gliders were released far too early or too late, and the result was catastrophic. However, the few gliders that did manage to crash land near their designated targets proved beyond a doubt the concept's potential to deliver combat-ready firepower instantly onto the objective. The lessons learned were written in blood, but they were indispensable. The tragic losses suffered during the Sicily landings underscored a harsh, lethal lesson for the glider pilot regiment. A glider hitting water was almost always a death sentence. The light wood and fabric construction offered virtually no reliable buoyancy, and the forward momentum of the high-speed descent instantly disintegrated the fragile airframe upon impact with the wave. Crews, heavily weighed down by their combat gear, had minimal chance of escape and survival in the dark Mediterranean waters. This sobering reality forced Allied planners to meticulously adjust flight paths in future operations to minimize the exposure of gliders to large bodies of water, though the risk could never be fully eliminated. The high failure rate in Sicily, where far too many gliders were lost, was a military disaster, yet it spurred massive, life-saving changes in procedure. The Allies immediately implemented improved tow-plane discipline, demanding more precise navigation and stricter adherence to tow release protocols. Training became more rigorous, focusing heavily on emergency procedures. These hard-won lessons were directly integrated into the planning for the Normandy invasion, transforming the glider operation from a suicidal gamble into a precise, calculated logistical tool that would prove decisive a year later. For the invasion of Normandy, gliders were critical. Their missions were strategically vital. They were tasked with quickly reinforcing the airborne divisions holding the flanks of the beachhead, particularly near the Orne River. Gliders delivered urgently needed anti-tank guns, crucial for facing the inevitable German panzer counterattacks, field ambulances, and massive quantities of ammunition and specialized equipment. Their ability to deliver these heavy assets silently and precisely into the pre-dawn chaos helped prevent a German armored breakthrough at the vulnerable, early stages of the invasion, effectively securing the beachhead for the main invasion force. The operation to capture the Pegasus Bridge remains perhaps the most legendary feat of glider warfare. A handful of British Horsa gliders, the larger Allied counterpart to the CG-4A, performed one of the most audacious landings in history, slamming down literally mere meters from their target bridge. The shock, precision, and utter silence of the attack allowed the glider-borne troops to seize the crucial crossing before the German defenders could fully mobilize or destroy the bridge. This lightning-fast, silent delivery demonstrated the glider's power perfectly, securing a vital route for the subsequent advance. Operation Market Garden was the largest airborne operation ever attempted, and gliders were deployed en masse to deliver thousands of troops and vast amounts of supplies. The goal was to seize a series of crucial bridges in the Netherlands. Gliders were essential in carrying anti-tank guns and engineer equipment needed to hold the captured ground. However, the mission's overambitious scope, its stretched objectives, and intelligence failures regarding local German defenses led to catastrophic losses of both men and vital equipment, marking one of the darkest and most costly chapters for the glider pilot regiment. The fighting around Arnhem became the mission's tragic focal point. Due to the distance and the presence of unexpected German armor, landing zones were quickly overrun. Gliders, designed for surprise, became prime targets. Many were destroyed either on their final approach by overwhelming German flak or immediately after landing by enemy infantry and tank. The sheer fragility of the canvas and wood construction meant that the glider troops were instantly exposed, and the mission's bravery was tragically overshadowed by the overwhelming operational risk. During the brutal winter counteroffensive known as the Battle of the Bulge, 1944 to 1945, gliders were called upon for one of their most desperate logistical roles: emergency supply. Flying through blinding snow, freezing conditions, and intense fog, they executed high-risk drops into encircled positions, most famously the besieged American troops at Bastogne. These missions, often carrying critically needed plasma, medical supplies, fuel, and anti-tank ammunition, were vital lifelines to soldiers who had been cut off. The glider, once again, proved its irreplaceable value in a crisis environment where conventional transport had been paralyzed by weather and the enemy. Operation Varsity, the Allied crossing of the Rhine, was the largest single-day airborne operation of the entire war. To reduce navigational errors and maximize coordination, the massive glider fleet was sent in during broad daylight, a terrifying reversal of previous nighttime tactics. This exposed the fragile craft to the maximum possible concentration of German flak and small arms fire. Despite the calculated heavy losses, the daylight insertion allowed the airborne troops to be delivered with unparalleled accuracy and speed, overwhelming the German defenses on the eastern bank. The success of Operation Varsity proved the continued utility of the glider even against determined, modern defenses. Despite the intense enemy fire, the glider formation successfully delivered 2 full airborne divisions and their essential heavy equipment directly behind the Rhine River defenses. This operation effectively shattered the last major German resistance barrier in the West. The silent, unarmed glider, capable of putting jeeps and howitzers on the ground instantly, was vital until the very end, confirming the concept's strategic value was greater than the cost in airframes. The CG-4A was fundamentally a single-use machine. Its low-cost, light construction, combined with the often violent nature of its crash landing, meant that recovery was rarely practical or economical. Once the troops and cargo were offloaded, the mission was deemed complete. The landing zones across Europe thus became vast, silent glider graveyards, strewn with shattered wood, ripped fabric, and mangled steel frames, a physical testament to the high attrition, one-way philosophy of airborne delivery. This mindset allowed commanders to treat the aircraft as an expendable logistical projectile. Due to the sheer scale of operations, the thousands of gliders left behind could not simply be left where they lay. While recovery was difficult and expensive, troops on the ground often practiced internal salvage. The sturdy wood frames were cannibalized for makeshift shelters, the resilient fabric was repurposed for patching tents or vehicles, and the steel tubing was often utilized for field repairs or structural reinforcements. Anything that could not be used immediately was frequently destroyed to prevent reuse by the enemy, or simply pushed aside by advancing mechanized columns. The true logistical genius of the CG-4A lay in its economic efficiency. Manufacturing a simple CG-4A cost only a tiny fraction of the resources, labor, and time required to build a single C-47 Skytran transport aircraft. This massive cost difference was the core of the glider concept. It allowed the Allies to sustain the high attrition rates inherent in airborne warfare. They could afford to lose a glider and its crew, but they could not afford to lose powered transport planes. The low-tech glider delivered a high strategic return on a minimal investment. Despite its simple construction, the logistics of getting the enormous, disassembled gliders to distant airfields in England was a massive undertaking. Due to their size, the gliders had to be shipped from American factories to Great Britain in colossal wooden crates. Once landed, they had to be painstakingly assembled near the launch points by ground crews. This required a huge network of specialized transport and assembly depots, adding a complex and often overlooked logistical layer to every major airborne operation. The simplicity of the glider's final flight masked a logistical nightmare of global coordination. While the American CG-4A was ubiquitous, its British counterpart, the Horsa glider, played an equally vital role. The Horsa was larger, capable of carrying heavier and bulkier loads, like anti-tank cannons, and was more aerodynamically sophisticated than the rugged, boxy Waco. However, the CG-4A was dramatically cheaper, easier to mass-produce across non-specialized factories, and arguably more durable for extremely rough landings. Both gliders were essential, demonstrating a successful strategic division of labor. The Horsa for heavy, precise loads, and the Waco for sheer quantity and ubiquity. The use of silent insertion was not exclusive to the Allies. German forces were pioneers in glider warfare, most famously using the massive Messerschmitt Me 321 Gigant. This enormous glider was capable of carrying true heavy armor, including light tanks. However, the German glider program was hampered by lack of reliable heavy-tow aircraft and fuel shortages late in the war. The success of the Allied gliders was, in part, a testament to their effective counter-strategy against the Axis belief in the utility of silent, heavy insertion, but at a far lower cost and higher scale. For the German troops on the receiving end, the glider assault was profoundly disorienting. The enemy was trained to listen for the roar of engines, the telltale sign of an incoming attack. The sudden, unannounced appearance of massive, dark shapes descending from the night sky, instantly disgorging fully armed soldiers and armored vehicles into their defensive positions, was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. The sense of vulnerability and total surprise created an immediate panic that often fragmented the enemy's defense, making the glider's silence a potent, non-lethal weapon. The glider pilots faced unique and disproportionate risks, flying unarmed and unarmored craft into enemy territory. Though often initially treated as secondary to the powered aircrews, their terrifying service eventually received the full recognition it deserved. Their dedication to the mission, delivering the crucial supplies that saved countless lives, cemented their reputation as unsung heroes. The motto of the British Glider Pilot Regiment, "Never a backward step," perfectly encapsulated the unwavering courage required to fly a one-way mission. The tactical principles pioneered by the CG-4A, the necessity of silent, high payload, precision insertion of elite teams and their specialized equipment, did not die with the war. The core concept lives on in modern special forces tactics. While gliders have been replaced by advanced vertical lift aircraft and stealth helicopters, the requirement remains the same: speed, silence, and the ability to put the right fighting tools precisely on the objective to maximize surprise and impact. The World War II glider provided the foundational blueprint for clandestine logistics. The Waco CG-4A was not a machine of thunder, it was one of silent, decisive delivery. Born from logistical necessity and built from wood and fabric, it conquered the chaos of supply with brilliant simplicity. It carried the heavy fight to the enemy's heart, fundamentally changing how airborne forces operated and securing critical objectives from Sicily to the Rhine. Its legacy is a powerful testament to the fact that the most critical battles are often won not by the largest gun or the fastest plane, but by the ingenious, low-tech hero that arrived in silence.